The maintenance bay of Nexus Station hummed with the familiar sounds of hydraulic lifts and plasma torches. Jake Morrison wiped grease from his hands as he crawled out from underneath a Centaurian cargo hauler, his weathered jumpsuit bearing the scars of countless repairs. At 42, he had spent the better part of 2 decades fixing everything from simple atmospheric processors to complex quantum drive systems. The aliens who frequented the station often looked down on humans, considering them primitive mechanics fit only for the dirty work that kept their advanced vessels running. Jake didn't mind the condescension. Credits were credits, and his reputation for fixing the unfixable had earned him steady work in the Outer Rim territories. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a sprawling complex of docking bays and commercial districts that served as a neutral meeting point for dozens of species. Humans were tolerated here, barely, as long as they stayed in their designated areas and performed their menial tasks without complaint. The proximity alarm chimed through the bay's communication system, announcing an incoming vessel. Jake glanced at the scheduling display and frowned. No ships were expected for another 3 hours. Emergency landings were rare, but not unheard of, especially this far from the core worlds where pirates and spatial anomalies posed constant threats. Through the reinforced transparisteel windows, Jake watched as a sleek vessel approached the station. The ship was unlike anything he had seen before, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly blue-green sheen that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Elegant curves and flowing lines marked it as clearly non-human in origin. But even among the exotic designs that regularly visited Nexus Station, this craft stood out as something special. The ship's landing was anything but graceful. It wobbled as it approached the docking bay, energy discharges crackling along its hull like miniature lightning storms. Whatever propulsion system it used was clearly failing, sending the vessel into an uncontrolled descent that would have been catastrophic if not for the station's emergency tractor beams. Jake was already moving before the ship had fully settled onto the landing platform. His toolkit in hand, he jogged across the bay floor, dodging maintenance drones and cargo loaders as he made his way to the new arrival. The ship's hull was warm to the touch, almost hot, and he could hear the whine of failing systems even through the thick metal. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and Jake found himself face to face with beings he had only heard about in whispered conversations among the station's more cosmopolitan residents. The Draconi were an ancient race, one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the known galaxy. Their reptilian features and imposing stature had earned them their common name, though Jake had heard they considered the comparison to mythical Earth dragons somewhat insulting. The first Draconi to emerge was clearly a male, his scales a deep emerald green that caught the bay's artificial lighting. He wore elaborate robes that marked him as nobility, and his golden eyes swept the bay with obvious disdain when they settled on Jake's human form. Behind him came 2 more males, their scales a lighter shade of green, clearly subordinates based on their simpler clothing and deferential posture. But it was the 4th figure that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. The female Draconi was smaller than her companions, her scales a brilliant silver blue that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Unlike the others, she moved with obvious difficulty, one hand pressed to her side where dark fluid stained her ornate garments. Her breathing was labored, and even from a distance, Jake could see that she was badly injured. The lead male approached Jake with measured steps, his expression one of barely contained disgust. When he spoke, his voice carried the melodious quality common to his species, though the words were clipped and cold. "Human," he said, the word dripping with condescension. "Our vessel requires immediate repair. The quantum resonance chamber has been damaged, and our environmental systems are failing. You will fix this at once." Jake glanced past the noble to the injured female, who had slumped against the ship's hull, her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. "Sir, with respect, Your friend there needs medical attention first. Our med bay is just across the— You will concern yourself only with the ship, the noble interrupted, his scales darkening with anger. The Princess Zarathia's condition is not your concern, human. Begin repairs immediately, or face the consequences of refusing aid to House Veltar. The name meant nothing to Jake, but the tone made it clear he was dealing with someone who expected absolute obedience. Still, his eyes kept drifting to the injured female, Princess Zarathia, who was clearly in desperate need of help. Her silver-blue scales had taken on a gray pallor, and the stain on her side was spreading. Jake had always been a mechanic first, but he was also human, and humans had a peculiar tendency to help those in need, regardless of species or social standing. It was a trait that had gotten them into trouble throughout their short history among the stars, but it was also one they seemed incapable of suppressing. "I'll get started on your ship right away," Jake said, hefting his toolkit. "But first, let me take a quick look at the princess. I've got some basic medical training and—" "Absolutely not!" The noble's voice rose to an angry hiss. "No human will lay hands upon royalty of the Draconi Imperium. Your very touch would be considered an act of defilement. Tend to the ship and nothing else." Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the other two Draconi moving to flank him, their hands resting on what were obviously weapon grips. He nodded reluctantly and moved toward the ship's open maintenance hatch, though his eyes kept straying to the princess, who was now sitting heavily on the deck plates, her back against the hull. The ship's interior was a maze of conduits and chambers that followed no engineering principles Jake recognized. Everything was curves and flowing lines, as if the entire vessel had been grown rather than built. The quantum resonance chamber was located deep in the ship's heart, a spherical room lined with crystalline formations that pulsed with fading light. Jake had never worked on Draconi technology before, but engineering principles were universal, and it didn't take long to identify the problem. Several of the crystals had cracked, disrupting the harmonic frequencies that powered the ship's systems. The damage was extensive but not impossible to repair, though it would require delicate work to realign the quantum matrices. As he worked, Jake could hear voices from outside the ship, the noble Draconi speaking in rapid, musical tones that he couldn't understand. The princess's responses grew weaker and more intermittent, confirming his suspicions that her condition was deteriorating rapidly. An hour into the repairs, Jake heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the soft thud of a body hitting the deck. He dropped his tools and rushed to the ship's entrance, arriving just in time to see Princess Zarathia collapse completely, her silver-blue scales now a sickly gray color. The three male Draconi stood around her, their expressions ranging from concern to outright panic. The noble was speaking rapidly into a communication device, clearly trying to reach someone, but Jake could see that whatever help he was summoning wouldn't arrive in time. "She's dying," Jake said, stepping forward. "Let me help her." "Stand back, human." The noble rounded on him, his scales flashing with angry colors. "This is not your concern." "Like hell it isn't," Jake replied, pushing past the startled alien. "I don't care about your politics or your prejudices. She's dying, and I can help." He dropped to his knees beside the princess, his hands hovering over her still form. Up close, he could see that her injury was a deep puncture wound, probably from some kind of energy weapon. The bleeding was internal, and without immediate intervention, she would be dead within minutes. Jake had served briefly in the human colonial defense forces before becoming a mechanic, and battlefield medicine had been part of his training. Draconi physiology was different from human, but the basic principles of trauma care were universal. He placed his hands on either side of the wound and began applying pressure, feeling for the damaged blood vessels beneath her scales. The reaction from the male Draconi was immediate and explosive. The noble let out a sound that was part roar, part shriek, and all three aliens moved toward Jake with obvious hostile intent. But before they could reach him, something extraordinary happened. The moment Jake's hands made contact with the princess's scales, a warm, golden light began to emanate from the point of contact. The light spread outward in rippling waves, covering the princess's entire body in a soft, healing glow. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his hands, as if energy was flowing through him and into the injured Draconi. The three male Draconi stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide with shock and something that looked like reverence. The noble's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as if he was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. Under Jake's hands, Princess Zarathia's breathing steadied and strengthened. The gray pallor left her scales, replaced by their original silver-blue brilliance. The wound in her side began to close, the torn flesh knitting itself back together with visible speed. Within moments, she was whole again, the only sign of her injury a faint silver scar that glowed softly in the bay's lighting. Jake sat back on his heels, staring at his hands in bewilderment. He had felt the energy flowing through him, but he had no idea where it had come from or how it was possible. The princess's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of deep sapphires. When she saw Jake kneeling beside her, those eyes widened in surprise and something else. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Impossible," the noble whispered, his voice barely audible. "The old legends, they cannot be true." Princess Zarathia sat up slowly, her movements careful, but showing no sign of the weakness that had nearly killed her moments before. She looked at Jake with an expression of wonder and gratitude, then spoke in heavily accented but clear English. You are the one, the healer spoken of in the ancient prophecies." Her voice was like music, soft and melodious despite her obvious surprise. But how can this be? The prophecies spoke of the star-touched, those who could channel the light of creation itself. But you are human. Jake shook his head, still trying to process what had happened. "I don't know anything about prophecies or star-touched whatever. I wanted to help. I couldn't stand by and watch you die." The noble Draconi, who Jake was beginning to suspect was the princess's brother or cousin based on their similar features, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of awe that hadn't been there before. "Forgive my earlier rudeness," he said, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. "I am Lord Thaindor Veltar, first prince of House Veltar and brother to Princess Zarathia. If the ancient prophecies are true, then you are more than we could have imagined." Jake climbed to his feet, offering his hand to help the princess rise. She accepted it without hesitation, and again that golden light flickered between them, though fainter this time. Once she was standing, Jake stepped back, unsure of the proper protocol when dealing with alien royalty. "I'm just Jake Morrison," he said simply. "I fix ships for a living. I don't know anything about prophecies or healing powers. This is all new to me, too." Princess Zarathia smiled, and the expression transformed her already beautiful features into something radiant. "Perhaps that is precisely why you are the one we have been waiting for. The prophecies spoke of one who would come from beyond the Imperium, one who would heal not through knowledge, but through compassion, one who would touch the dying and bring them back to life." Before Jake could respond, the communication device in Lord Thaindor's hand crackled to life. A voice spoke in rapid Draconi, the tone urgent and clearly distressed. The prince's expression grew grave as he listened, and when the transmission ended, he looked at his sister with obvious concern. "The Imperial fleet approaches," he said. "Word has reached them of your incident. Father's ships will be here within hours, and they will expect explanations." He looked at Jake with an expression that mixed respect with uncertainty. They will also expect to see the human who dared to touch royal blood. Princess Zarathia's scales rippled with what Jake was beginning to recognize as emotional displays among her species. This particular pattern seemed to indicate worry or concern. The Imperium has strict laws regarding contact between humans and Draconi nobility, she explained to Jake. Under normal circumstances, what you have done would be considered a crime punishable by exile or worse. But these are not normal circumstances. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had acted on instinct, driven by the simple human need to help someone in trouble. The idea that his good deed might be punished had never occurred to him, though in retrospect, he probably should have considered the political implications. "What do you recommend?" he asked, looking between the two siblings. Lord Thanador and Princess Zarathia exchanged a rapid conversation in their musical language, their expressions growing more serious with each exchange. Finally, the princess turned back to Jake with a look of determination. "There is only one path that ensures your safety and preserves the honor of House Veltar," she said. "You must come with us to the imperial capital. The Empress herself must witness what has transpired here. If the prophecies are true, then your arrival heralds a new age for the Imperium, an age that was foretold in our most ancient texts." Jake looked around the maintenance bay that had been his home and workplace for the past 5 years. It wasn't much, but it was his life, predictable and safe. What the princess was suggesting would change everything, throwing him into a world of alien politics and ancient prophecies that he barely understood. But as he looked at Princess Zarathia, still glowing with the faint after-effect of whatever he had done to heal her, Jake realized that his old life was already over. The moment he had touched her, the moment that golden light had flowed through him, everything had changed. There was no going back to being just another human mechanic on a backwater station. "When do we leave?" he asked. The journey to the Draconi Imperial capital took 3 days aboard the royal transport that had arrived to escort Princess Zarathia home. Jake had never seen a ship like it. The vessel was massive, easily the size of a small city, with living quarters that resembled palaces more than spacecraft accommodations. Everything was crafted from materials that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, responding to touch and thought in ways that defied human understanding of technology. Jake's quarters were luxurious beyond anything he had experienced, but he felt like a prisoner despite the golden cage. Draconi crew members avoided him entirely, and when they did encounter him in the corridors, they would stop and stare with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear. Word of what had happened on Nexus Station had spread throughout the ship, and Jake found himself the subject of whispered conversations in musical languages he couldn't understand. Princess Zarathia visited him daily, bringing meals and engaging in conversations that helped pass the time. Through these talks, Jake learned about the Draconi Imperium and the ancient prophecies that had apparently made him something of a celebrity among her people. "The prophecies speak of the time of convergence," she explained during one of their afternoon meetings. "A period when the barriers between species would begin to fall, when healing would flow from unexpected sources. The star-touched were said to be harbingers of this age, beings who could channel the fundamental forces of life itself." Jake stirred his alien tea, a beverage that tasted like cinnamon and starlight if such a thing were possible. "But why me? I'm nobody special, just a mechanic who got lucky." "Lucky?" Zarathia's scales rippled with what Jake had learned was amusement. "You brought me back from the edge of death with nothing but your touch and your compassion. The medical scanners showed that my internal organs were failing, that I had perhaps minutes to live. What you did was not luck. It was miracle." Through the viewport of Jake's quarters, the Draconi homeworld grew larger by the hour. Draconia Prime was a world of impossible beauty, its surface covered in crystalline cities that rose like living trees toward the sky. Vast gardens stretched between the urban centers, and floating islands held additional structures that seemed to drift through the atmosphere like clouds. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, Jake could see the Imperial Palace in the distance, a massive structure that dominated the capital city like a mountain of living crystal. Spires and towers reached toward the heavens, their surfaces reflecting the light of Draconia Prime's twin suns in dazzling displays of color and radiance. The landing at the Imperial spaceport was a spectacle unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Thousands of Draconi had gathered to see the return of Princess Zarathea and to catch a glimpse of the human who had supposedly fulfilled their ancient prophecies. The crowd was kept at a respectful distance by Imperial guards, massive Draconi warriors whose scales were armored with biotechnology that seemed to grow from their very bodies. Jake felt overwhelmed by the attention as he walked down the transport's boarding ramp. The Draconi in the crowd pointed and whispered, their scales shifting through various color patterns that he was beginning to recognize as emotional displays. Some showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few displayed what he thought might be reverence. Princess Zarathea walked beside him, her presence a reassuring anchor in the sea of alien attention. She wore formal court attire now, elaborate robes that seemed to be cut from fabric made of liquid light, adorned with jewels that pulsed with their own inner fire. Despite her elevated status, she stayed close to Jake, occasionally offering quiet words of encouragement. "Remember," she said as they approached the waiting Imperial convoy, "show no fear. The Empress will test you as she tests all who come before her. But she is fair, and if you speak truthfully, you have nothing to worry about." The convoy consisted of vehicles that floated above the ground on cushions of contained energy. Jake found himself seated across from Lord Thaindor, who had been unusually quiet since their arrival. The prince's expression was troubled, and Jake got the impression that bringing a human to the Imperial Palace was creating complications that went far beyond what anyone had anticipated. The journey through the capital city was breathtaking. The Draconi architecture was unlike anything in human space, buildings that seemed to grow from the ground like living things, their surfaces covered in patterns that shifted and changed as they passed. Gardens hung suspended in the air, tended by Draconi who flew between them on wings that Jake hadn't realized their species possessed. "Not all Draconi can fly," Zarathea explained, noticing his surprised expression. "The ability is tied to bloodline and age. Those you see are members of the Gardener caste, bred specifically for aerial work. Each caste has its own genetic modifications suited to their role in society." The Imperial Palace loomed larger as they approached, its crystal walls reaching heights that seemed to scrape the very sky. Guards in ornate armor lined the approach, their ceremonial weapons crackling with contained energy. Jake felt increasingly small and out of place as they drew nearer to the seat of power for one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. The throne room was a cavern of living crystal that stretched up into darkness far above. Pillars of translucent stone supported a ceiling that might have been kilometers high, and the walls were covered in carvings that seemed to move and flow when viewed from the corner of the eye. At the far end of the vast space, on a dais that rose like a crystalline mountain, sat the throne of the Draconi Imperium. Empress Velnara was ancient even by Draconi standards, her scales having taken on the deep purple-black color that marked extreme age among her species. She was smaller than Jake had expected, but her presence filled the enormous throne room like a palpable force. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of millennia. "Approach, star-touched human," she commanded, and her words echoed through the crystal chamber with supernatural clarity. Jake walked forward, acutely aware of the hundreds of Draconi courtiers who lined the walls of the throne room. Their scales displayed a spectrum of colors that he was beginning to understand represented various emotional states: curiosity, skepticism, fear, and something that might have been hope. When he reached the base of the dais, Jake stopped and waited, unsure of the proper protocol. Princess Zarathea had coached him on basic court etiquette during their journey, but standing before the ruler of a galactic empire was more intimidating than any briefing could have prepared him for. "You may speak," the Empress said after a long moment of silence. "Your Imperial Majesty," Jake began, his voice echoing in the vast space. "I'm honored to be here, though I'm not entirely sure why. I helped someone who was injured because it was the right thing to do. I don't understand why that's being treated as something miraculous." A ripple of surprised colors moved through the assembled courtiers. Apparently, Jake's direct approach was unexpected. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her ancient eyes studying Jake with an intensity that made him feel as though she was seeing straight through to his soul. "Show me," she commanded. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but show you what?" "The healing light, the power that saved my daughter's life. Show me proof that the prophecies have been fulfilled." Jake felt panic rising in his chest. He had no idea how to summon the golden light that had flowed through him on Nexus Station. It had happened instinctively, driven by desperation and compassion. He couldn't simply call it forth on command. "I don't know how," he admitted. "It just happened when I saw that she was dying. I've never done anything like that before, and I don't know if I can do it again." The throne room erupted in whispered conversations as the assembled courtiers discussed Jake's admission. Some scales darkened with disappointment, while others showed what might have been understanding. The Empress raised one clawed hand, and the room fell silent immediately. "Bring forth the afflicted," she commanded. 2 guards escorted a young Draconi into the throne room, and Jake's heart sank as he saw the creature's condition. The youngster, Jake couldn't tell if it was male or female, was clearly suffering from some kind of wasting disease. Its scales were dull and gray, and it moved with the careful steps of someone in constant pain. "This is Kesatara," the Empress explained. "A promising young scholar who has been dying slowly for the past year. Our finest healers have tried everything, but the disease continues to consume them from within. If you are truly the star-touched, if you truly possess the healing gift, then save this child." Jake looked at the suffering young Draconi and felt the familiar stirring of compassion that had driven him to help Princess Zarathea. But this was different. On the station, he had acted without thinking, driven by pure instinct. Now he was being asked to perform on command, in front of hundreds of witnesses, with the young creature's life hanging in the balance. He approached Kesatara slowly, noting how the young Draconi's breathing was labored and shallow. Up close, Jake could see that the disease was indeed consuming the creature from within. The scales were not just dull, but actually beginning to crack and fall away in places. "May I?" Jake asked gently, extending his hands. Kesatara nodded weakly, and Jake placed his hands on the young Draconi's shoulders. For a moment, nothing happened, and Jake felt the weight of hundreds of stares pressing down on him. Doubt crept into his mind. What if it had been a fluke? What if he couldn't help this time? But then he looked into Kesatara's eyes and saw the same look he had seen in Princess Zarathea's eyes on the station. The look of someone facing death with courage, but desperately hoping for salvation. The compassion that had driven him before welled up again, and with it came the familiar warmth in his hands. Golden light began to emanate from the points where Jake's hands touched Kesatara's shoulders. The light spread outward, flowing over the young Draconi's body like liquid sunlight. Where the light touched, the dull gray scales brightened and strengthened, taking on the vibrant green color of healthy youth. Jake felt the energy flowing through him, stronger this time than it had been on the station. He could sense the disease that was consuming Kesatara's body, could feel it fighting against the healing force that flowed from his touch. But the light was stronger, driven by his determination to save the young creature's life. The transformation took longer than it had with Princess Zarathea. But it was no less dramatic. Kesatara's breathing deepened and strengthened, the cracks in the damaged scales sealed themselves, and the gray pallor of disease was replaced by the vibrant colors of perfect health. When the light faded, Kesatara stood straight and strong, looking around the throne room with wonder and joy. The young Draconi's voice was clear and strong as they spoke. I feel wonderful. The pain is gone. Everything is gone except life. The throne room erupted in chaos. Courtiers rushed forward to examine Kesatara, their scales flashing through rapid color changes that Jake was beginning to understand indicated extreme excitement. Medical scanners appeared as if from nowhere, operated by Draconi in elaborate robes who Jake assumed were court physicians. After several minutes of examination and scanning, the lead physician approached the throne and bowed deeply. "Your Imperial Majesty," the doctor announced, "the subject is completely cured. Every trace of the consuming blight has been eliminated from their system. More than that, their body shows signs of enhancement beyond normal Draconi parameters. Increased bone density, improved neural pathways, enhanced immune response. They are not merely healed, they are improved." The Empress stood slowly from her throne, her ancient form moving with surprising grace as she descended the crystal steps to stand before Jake. When she reached him, she extended one clawed hand, and Jake instinctively reached out to take it. The moment their hands touched, golden light erupted through the throne room like a miniature sun. But this was different from the healing light Jake had used before. This was communication, understanding, knowledge flowing both ways between human and Draconi. In that instant of contact, Jake saw the true history of the Draconi Imperium. He saw their rise from a primitive reptilian species to masters of biotechnology and space travel. He saw their first contact with other species, their gradual expansion across the galaxy, and their eventual role as peacekeepers and mediators between the younger races. But he also saw their decline. Millennia of genetic manipulation and technological enhancement had improved their bodies and minds, but it had also made them increasingly isolated from the fundamental forces of life that had once driven their evolution. They had become so focused on perfection that they had lost touch with the raw, chaotic energy of natural existence. And in the deepest archives of their racial memory, Jake saw the prophecies themselves. Not words written in books, but genetic memories passed down through countless generations. The star-touched were not just healers. They were catalysts, beings who would help the Draconi reconnect with the natural forces they had abandoned in their pursuit of perfection. When the light faded and their hands separated, the Empress looked at Jake with an expression of wonder and something that might have been relief. "The prophecies are true," she announced to the assembled court. "The time of convergence has begun. This human is indeed the star-touched, the one who will help us remember what we have forgotten." She turned to address the entire throne room, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Let it be known throughout the Imperium that Jake Morrison of the human species is hereby granted the title of Healer Prince and made a full member of the Imperial family. He shall have all the rights and privileges of royalty, and any who harm him shall answer to the throne itself." Jake felt the world spinning around him. In the space of a few minutes, he had gone from being a simple mechanic to a prince of an alien empire. The implications were staggering, but before he could fully process what had happened, Princess Zarathea appeared at his side, her scales showing colors he had learned to recognize as joy and pride. "Welcome to the family, Prince Jake," she said with a smile that lit up her entire face. But even as the court celebrated around them, Jake noticed that not all the assembled Draconi were displaying positive emotions. In the darker corners of the throne room, some scales showed colors he had learned to associate with anger and resentment. Change, even prophesied change, was apparently not welcome by everyone in the Imperium. As if reading his thoughts, Princess Zarathea leaned closer and spoke in a voice only he could hear. "The greatest challenges still lie ahead," she warned. "The prophecies speak of trials that the star-touched must face, forces that will try to prevent the convergence from occurring. But for now, celebrate. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Jake nodded, understanding that his new life was only beginning, and that the healing power flowing through him would be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's elevation to Healer Prince, and life in the Imperial Palace had proven to be more complex than he could have imagined. While he had been given quarters befitting his new status, a suite of rooms larger than most human habitats, and access to knowledge and technology beyond human comprehension, he had also discovered that royal status came with its own unique set of challenges. The healing requests never stopped. Every day brought new petitioners to the palace, Draconi suffering from ailments that their advanced medical technology couldn't cure. Jake found himself working longer hours than he ever had as a mechanic, but instead of fixing ships, he was healing bodies and sometimes souls. Each healing left him drained but oddly fulfilled, as if he was finally doing what he was meant to do. Princess Zarathea had become his closest advisor and friend during this transition period. She helped him navigate the complex web of imperial politics and taught him the subtle nuances of Draconi culture that would have taken years to learn on his own. More importantly, she had become someone he could trust completely, in a world where trust was a rare commodity. The challenges that Princess Zarathea had warned him about began to manifest in subtle ways at first. Certain members of the imperial court started questioning whether a human should hold such an exalted position. Messages arrived from outer provinces expressing concern about the influence of an alien species on imperial policy. Trade representatives from other civilizations began making inquiries about this new development, some friendly, others decidedly less so. But the most serious challenge came from an unexpected source. Jake was in the middle of healing a young Draconi warrior who had been injured in a border skirmish when the palace alarm systems began blaring. Emergency lights bathed the healing chamber in crimson illumination, and Jake could hear the sound of running feet in the corridors beyond. Lord Thaindor burst into the chamber, his scales dark with stress and urgency. "Jake, you need to come immediately," he said, his usual formal demeanor abandoned. "We have a situation." Jake completed the healing, watching as the warrior's damaged scales regrew and his internal injuries mended themselves. Only then did he turn to face the prince. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that could start a war," Thainador replied grimly. They rushed through the palace corridors, past guards who were mobilizing for some unknown threat. Jake noticed that many of the Draconi they passed were displaying scale colors he had learned to associate with fear and anger. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to shake the normally unflappable imperial court. The situation became clear when they reached the palace's main communication center. On the massive display screens that dominated the room, Jake could see images of space vessels surrounding Draconia Prime. But these weren't Draconi ships. The vessels were angular and predatory, their hulls covered in aggressive spikes and weapon emplacements. Jake had never seen their design before, but their hostile intent was unmistakable. Empress Velnara stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by military advisors and communication specialists. Her ancient features were carved from stone as she listened to reports from her fleet commanders. "The Korath hegemony," she explained when she noticed Jake's arrival. "One of our oldest enemies. They have been quiet for centuries, but it appears that word of your presence here has reached them." "What do they want with me?" Jake asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be pleasant. "The Korath are a warrior species, but they are also dying," Princess Zarathea explained as she joined the group. "Their genetic line has been weakened by millennia of warfare and genetic manipulation gone wrong. They have been seeking a cure for generations, and now they believe you are that cure. On the display screens, the lead Korath vessel was moving closer to the planet, its weapons charging with energy that painted space in sickly green light. "Incoming transmission," one of the communications specialists announced. The main screen shifted to show the bridge of the Korath vessel. Jake's first sight of a Korath was disturbing. They had once been reptilian like the Draconi, but genetic manipulation and cybernetic enhancement had transformed them into something that was part organic, part machine. Their leader's face was a patchwork of scarred flesh and mechanical components, his eyes replaced by glowing optical sensors. "Greetings, Empress," the Korath commander said, his voice a harsh mechanical rasp. "I am war leader Grixthon of the Hegemony's First Fleet. We have come to collect the human healer. Surrender him to us, and we will withdraw peacefully." The Empress's scales darkened with anger, but her voice remained level. "The human is under Imperial protection, war leader. He is a member of the royal family and cannot be surrendered to foreign powers." Grixthon's mechanical laugh was like grinding metal. "Your royal family means nothing to us, Empress. Our race is dying, and this human represents our only hope for survival. We will take him by force if necessary. You would violate Imperial space and threaten our homeworld for one individual?" The Empress's voice carried a note of warning that made Jake's skin crawl. "We would burn every world in the galaxy if it meant saving our people," Grixthan replied without hesitation. "You have 1 hour to surrender the human. After that, we begin bombardment of your capital city." The transmission ended, leaving the communication center in tense silence. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. An entire planet was being threatened because of him, because of abilities he barely understood and hadn't asked for. "How many people live in the capital?" he asked quietly. "Approximately 50 million, Lord Thaindor replied. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the enormity of the situation crushing down on him. 50 million lives hanging in the balance because a dying alien species wanted to use his healing abilities. "I'll go with them," he said, opening his eyes to meet the Empress's ancient gaze. "Absolutely not." Princess Zarathea stepped forward, her scales flashing with protective colors. "You don't understand what they are, Jake. The Korath don't just want healing, they want to own you, to turn you into nothing more than a tool for their use. They would imprison you, force you to work for them until you died of exhaustion." "But if I don't go, they'll destroy the city," Jake pointed out. "I can't let that many people die because of me. And I cannot allow you to sacrifice yourself for political expediency," the Empress declared firmly. "You are not just a healer, Jake Morrison. The prophecies speak of you as a catalyst for change throughout the galaxy. Your role is larger than any single crisis." As if summoned by her words, one of the military advisors stepped forward with a grim expression. "Your Imperial Majesty, our fleet commanders report that the Korath have brought significant firepower. Our orbital defenses could repel them, but the cost in lives would be enormous. They have positioned their ships so that any battle would take place directly over the capital." Jake felt the familiar stirring of compassion that had driven him to heal Princess Zarathea and young Kessatara. But this time, the pain he wanted to heal wasn't physical. It was the desperation of an entire dying species. The Korath might be enemies of the Imperium, but they were still living beings facing extinction. "What if there's another way?" he said suddenly. All eyes turned to him, and Jake felt the weight of their attention as he struggled to put his thoughts into words. "The Korath are dying, right? Their genetic line is failing?" When the others nodded, he continued. "What if I could heal them without being their prisoner? What if I could cure their entire species and end this threat once and for all?" "Impossible," Lord Thaindor said immediately. "You're talking about healing millions of individuals across dozens of worlds. Even if your power could reach that far, the effort would kill you." But Princess Zarathea was looking at Jake with a strange expression, her scales showing colors he couldn't interpret. "The prophecies," she whispered. "The final prophecy speaks of the great healing. When the star touched would heal not just individuals but entire species. I thought it was metaphorical, but what if it's not?" Jake finished. "What if that's exactly what I'm supposed to do?" The Empress moved closer, her ancient eyes studying Jake's face intently. "Such an act would require power beyond anything you have displayed so far," she warned. "And the risk—" "The risk is mine to take," Jake interrupted gently. "I didn't ask for these abilities, but I have them. And if I can use them to save both the Korath and prevent a war, then that's what I have to do." Princess Zarathea placed her hand on his arm, and Jake felt the familiar warmth of connection flow between them. "If you're going to attempt this, you won't do it alone," she said firmly. "The prophecies speak of the star-touched drawing strength from those who believe in them. The entire Imperium believes in you now, Jake. Use that belief." Preparations for what they were calling the Great Healing took place with frantic efficiency. The palace's most powerful communication arrays were reconfigured to broadcast across the galaxy. Scientists and technicians worked to understand the theoretical principles behind Jake's healing ability, hoping to find ways to amplify and focus his power. But the most important preparation was emotional. Jake spent hours in meditation with Princess Zarathea, learning to feel the connections that linked all living beings throughout the galaxy. She taught him to sense the flow of life energy that connected every creature, from the smallest microbe to the largest star whale that swam through space between the worlds. "Life is not separate," she explained as they sat together in the palace's meditation garden. "Everything that lives is connected to everything else through bonds that most cannot see. Your gift allows you to manipulate those bonds, to strengthen them, to heal them when they are damaged. But healing an entire species is healing one life multiplied across millions of individuals," she finished. "The principle is the same, just the scale is different." When the hour deadline approached, Jake stood on the palace's highest balcony, looking up at the Korath ships that hung like metal vultures in the sky above. Princess Zarathea stood beside him, along with the Empress and Lord Thaindor. Throughout the palace and the city beyond, millions of Draconi had gathered to witness what many believed would be the fulfillment of their most ancient prophecies. Jake opened his communication link to the Korath fleet. "War Leader Grixthan, this is Jake Morrison. I have a proposition for you." The mechanical voice that responded was filled with suspicion. "You have 15 minutes before we begin bombardment, human. Speak quickly." "I'm willing to heal your people," Jake said. "All of them. Every Korath in your entire species. But I won't do it as your prisoner. I'll do it as a gift, freely given, with no conditions attached." There was a long pause before Grixthan responded. "Impossible. You cannot heal millions from a distance." "Watch me," Jake replied simply. He closed his eyes and reached out with his consciousness, feeling for the connections that Princess Zarathea had taught him to sense. At first he could only feel the life energy of those immediately around him, Zarathea's warm presence, the Empress's ancient strength, the millions of Draconi throughout the capital city. But as he expanded his awareness, Jake began to sense more distant connections. The life energy of Draconi on other worlds, other species in nearby star systems, and finally, the tortured, twisted life force of the Korath themselves. They were indeed dying. Their genetic manipulation and cybernetic enhancements had damaged them at the cellular level, creating a cascade of failures that was slowly killing their entire species. But underneath the damage, Jake could sense the original Korath genetic template, the healthy, vibrant species they had once been before their experiments had gone wrong. Jake reached out with his healing power not to touch individual Korath, but to touch the very essence of what it meant to be Korath. He found the damaged genetic patterns that were causing their decline and began to repair them, strengthening the bonds that held their cellular structure together, healing the wounds that centuries of genetic manipulation had inflicted upon their species. The effort was enormous, far beyond anything Jake had attempted before. Golden light erupted from his body, so bright that it could be seen from orbit. The light spread outward in waves, passing through the Korath ships above and racing across space toward every Korath world in the galaxy. Jake felt the healing energy flowing through him like a river of fire. It burned away his human limitations, transformed his consciousness into something larger and more universal. For a brief moment, he was connected to every living being in the galaxy, feeling their pain, their joy, their hopes and fears as if they were his own. But the cost was devastating. Jake felt his human body beginning to break down under the strain of channeling so much power. His consciousness started to fragment, pieces of himself being carried away with the healing energy he was broadcasting across the stars. Just when he thought he would be torn apart completely, Jake felt other presences joining with his own. Princess Zarathia's consciousness merged with his, lending him her strength. The Empress added her ancient wisdom and power. Lord Thanador contributed his noble spirit. And beyond them, Jake could sense millions of other Draconi throughout the Imperium, all lending him their life energy to fuel the great healing. With their combined strength, Jake was able to complete the work. The healing energy reached every Korath world, touched every member of their dying species, and restored them to genetic health. Centuries of accumulated damage were repaired in moments, giving the Korath back their original vitality and strength. When the golden light finally faded, Jake collapsed to his knees on the palace balcony, utterly exhausted but alive. Princess Zarathia caught him as he fell, her own scales pale with the effort of what they had accomplished together. Above them, the Korath ships hung silent in space for long moments. Then, slowly, their weapons powered down and their aggressive formations dispersed. War leader Grixthan's voice came through the communication system, but it was different now, clearer, more organic, less mechanical. Human, Jake Morrison, what have you done to us? I've given you back what you lost, Jake replied weakly. Your health, your vitality, your future. No strings attached. There was another long pause before Grixthan spoke again. Our medical scanners confirm what we can feel in our own bodies. The genetic damage has been reversed. The cellular degradation has stopped. We are whole again. Jake struggled to his feet with Princess Zarathia's help. Then go home, he said. Live your lives. Build something better than what you had before. And remember that healing is always better than conquest. The Korath fleet began to withdraw, their ships turning away from Draconia Prime and heading back toward their own territory. But before the last ship disappeared, Grixthan's voice came through the communication system one final time. The hegemony will remember this debt, Jake Morrison. The Korath do not forget those who show us mercy when we deserve none. If you ever have need of us, you have only to call. As the alien ships vanished into hyperspace, Jake felt Princess Zarathia's arms around him, supporting him as the last of his strength finally gave out. Is it over? He asked. This crisis is over, she replied, her voice warm with affection and pride. But your real work is just beginning. The galaxy knows about you now, Jake. Every species that has heard of the great healing will want to meet the human who healed an entire civilization. Some will come seeking help. Others will come seeking to use your power for their own ends. And what do you think I should do about that? Princess Zarathia smiled, and Jake realized that somewhere during their time together, he had fallen completely in love with this remarkable alien woman who had become his closest friend and strongest supporter. I think, she said, that the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place, and I think that whatever comes next We'll face it together. Jake looked out over the crystal city that had become his new home, then up at the stars that held countless worlds and species he had yet to meet. The simple mechanic from Nexus Station was gone, replaced by something he was still learning to understand. But whatever he had become, whatever he was meant to be, he knew that Princess Zarathea was right. They would face it together, and perhaps that was the most important prophecy of all. That healing wasn't something done alone, but something shared between all living beings who chose to care for one another. The time of convergence had begun, and Jake Morrison, former mechanic and current healer prince of the Draconi Imperium, was ready to discover what that truly meant.